Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I'm glad that the method we record on means that we can't actually see each other, because I imagine you woke up with the same self-satisfied, smug smile that you went to sleep with last night after that remarkable performance against Liverpool.
Just call me the Cheshire Cat, Kevin. That's how I'm looking today. I'm irritatingly cheerful at the best of times, but wow, 50 years of watching it, best overall 90 minutes performance. I'm still pinching myself. And fair play to Jurgen Klopp and fair play to all the Liverpool fans I spoke to after the match. They were no excuses, we'll take it. Yeah, if you support a club like ours or yours, you do have these moments, you do have these periods of time, and make the most of everything. That's what I always say to fans, because ultimately you're trying to beat gravity in terms of the money in the game, and we know that's why we have this show. But we're doing okay at present.
Well, talking of my club, Kieran, and the money in the game, Palace are off to Stamford Bridge this afternoon for an inevitable bit of charitable work in an attempt to keep Graham Potter in a job by losing to Chelsea. But many people this week, Kieran, and I don't particularly know why it's been driven this week in particular. I was trying not to use the word particular twice here, Kieran, but I failed spectacularly. I'm disappointed with myself. But a lot of people have been asking us, especially on social media, about the amount of money that Chelsea have spent on players and how they're still able to stay within FFP regulations while doing so.
Yeah, I think it is an intriguing one, because we've seen that Manchester United are signing a player effectively from Burnley on loan because of financial fair play considerations. I think what you need to do is to look at all of the dynamics and the money both coming in and going out of the club in terms of how it impacts upon FFP. And I think one of the downsides of FFP is that it is based on accounting figures, and I'm the first to admit that they can be, I don't think manipulated is the right appropriate word, but I don't think they necessarily show the overall true picture. So if we take a look at Chelsea, what you find is over the course of the last decade, they have sold players at a profit of £658 million. Now, that compares to Manchester United, who during the same period have sold players at a profit of about £130 million. So they've got over £500 million of extra money coming in. And remember, FFP is effectively your money coming in compared to your money going out. And when we think of money, we think of cash. But for FFP purposes, it comes to the favourite word of the Price of Football podcast, amortisation. And Chelsea, I think is it Mudryk, the Shakhtar Donetsk winger that they signed underneath the noses of Arsenal just before this show went out. In effect, I suspect they signed him on an £80 million contract. They've made some other big signings of tens and tens of millions. But if you take a look at the way that these deals have been organised, these players are on 6.5-year or 7-year contracts. Yeah. So from an FFP basis, if I sign a player for £80 million on a 7-year contract, you spread that cost through amortisation, and you end up with effectively an FFP cost of just over £11 million. Chelsea last year, they sold Tomori, they sold Abrahams. Both of these, of course, were academy players, and they sold them probably for a profit in the region of around about 70 million from those two players alone. So when you sell a player, all of the profit goes into your calculations immediately. But when you buy a player, the cost of that player is spread over the life of the contract. And normally when you'd sign a player, you'd be looking at perhaps a 3 or a 4-year deal, especially for an unproven player. What Chelsea have done, and this is a gamble, because if these players turn out to be the next Nikola Zigic or the next, say, Winston Bogarde, who have been signed on big contracts on big money, and they don't deliver, you've then left with a player on tens, if not £100,000 a week or more, and you can't shift the player because nobody else is willing to match those wages, and nobody's willing to pay a decent transfer fee. So it is a gamble, but from a financial fair play point of view, they are okay. If they don't get into Europe, it's going to make things a lot more squeaky bum, though, when we reach this summer's window.
I went to see my accountant, little Bobby Numbers, on Wednesday about my next tax return. And in response to a plaintive question from me, Bobby Numbers agreed that accounting figures can be manipulated, but he had no intention of doing so. He did suggest there are a couple of tax experts on a market stall in Tooting that may help me, but in the meantime, just going to have to suck it up. Our first question, Kieran, comes from Mike Lloyd. And I'm assuming that Mike Lloyd is a Wolves fan because he says that last year Wolves chairman Jeff Shee said that the club are now a corporate, Fosun Sports, having diversified into fashion, music and esports. Our 200,000 legacy fan base isn't big enough, apparently, so they plan to market the brand in Asia, selling clothing and advertising to our new fan base. Downside is we won't fix Molineux, which is falling apart. We won't invest in improving the team. And we will have to buy Chinese and Korean footballers that appeal to our new fan base. Although I should point out there are many, many very good Chinese and Korean footballers that appeal to your new fan base. And you're bringing quite a few Portuguese ones in as well. But Mike says, my question is this. Does any team other than us have this business model? And is this the future for football fans?
I think this is an intriguing one where a football club is acquired by a conglomerate and they are seen as just another arm of the overall multifaceted business. And therefore you are a brand and you are expected to increase the overall income of the business as a whole. I think Fosun are perhaps being a wee bit ambitious here, though, because why do people buy products? They buy them because they associate the brand with success. They associate the brand normally with a particular position or viewpoint or lifestyle. And consumers can be very fickle. So we've said in the past that football, in many regards, is a very silly business because you've got 25 to 30 paydays a year. If that's if you're lucky, that's if you have a lot of cup success, and the rest of the time your stadium's empty. So trying to make Wolverhampton Wanderers into a lifestyle brand, you can see the logic behind it, but converting that logic into success is more of a challenge. You don't see Manchester United, for example, have got let's be honest, they've got a lot more than Wolves' legacy fan base. And yes, they sell a lot of merchandise, but the vast majority of that is football kit related. Yet they do try to move into leisure wear. And lots of clubs have tried this in the past with limited success because, even if you're a die-hard Manchester United fan or Wolves fan, do you actually want to buy a Steve Bull duvet cover or a Gary Neville toothbrush mug? That there's a limited amount of people willing to pay for that. So sometimes you might be able to come up with a marketing strategy, and you won't necessarily be using the footballers. You might be using other influencers who wear the branded goods, but that doesn't tend to have a long-term impact on the overall success of Wolverhampton Wanderers as a brand. Ultimately, that will come from success on the pitch. And you could argue there's a bit of chicken and egg here. If they invest a lot of money into the brand and that brings in more money, that's more money for the football club, which makes the football club more successful, which drives up the brand. And you can create a virtuous circle. But lots of people historically have tried this in the game. And I think it's fair to say that very few have succeeded.
I don't think anyone's going to get a good night's sleep under a Steve Bull duvet cover, are they? That would be terrifying. And good luck to the marketing man who tries to sell anything that's got Gary Neville next to the word mug. Wolves, of course, back in the 50s, Wolves were pioneers in branding. They branded themselves, didn't they, as Europe's best team. They installed floodlights very early so they could get a series of lucrative friendlies against the best teams in Europe. juiced up their kit. I think they got shiny wood. So there is there's nothing new under the sun really when it comes to football, is there, Kieran? It's just the scale and the scope across the world that we're talking about, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. And Wolves are up against Manchester United and Real Madrid and PSG with the players that those clubs have, who are brands in their own rights, and it's tough. It's really tough. That some do manage it, but that tends to be quite often individuals in sport. If you think about Tiger Woods and Roger Federer and so on, it's actually quite difficult for a team to do it, especially if you do have a very successful player or even a few players, because football being the pecking order that it is that those players, as soon as they get identified as being good, they become attractive to other clubs with bigger wallets. So I wish Wolves all the best, because it's one of my favourite away day trips. But I think Fosun are being a wee bit ambitious here. I appreciate that from their point of view, they know the Chinese market far better than people sitting here on this podcast, and they might feel that they'll be able to open that particular door. But I think the Chinese consumer as well is also quite discerning, and trying to get them to buy those branded goods will be a huge challenge.
Was that Finley barking in the distance, or a very small dog barking next to you?
No, it is Finley who. We're recording this at 10:30 in the morning on Sunday, and that's when the Baroness has her Nespresso coffee capsule thing, and every time that she does that, as soon as she puts on the machine, I'm letting you into the secrets of my very dull life here. He has a Pavlovian reaction, because he knows he normally gets a wonky chomp when she has her coffee. So I think she's normally does it at 10:15, and she's a bit late, and he has got this internal clock, so he's making noises along the lines of get your ass into gear, girl.
Well, talking of branding, you two are a lifestyle brand in yourself. Why the front of Hello magazine hasn't been graced with a picture of you two fondly holding Finley is beyond me. Scunthorpe United, Kieran, are a team, unfortunately, we've mentioned far too much recently. And this question comes from Barry Nichol, and it turns out to be very relevant this weekend, unfortunately. And Barry says, and I'm guessing he said this when they were relegated, Barry says, after 72 years, sadly, my local team, Scunthorpe United, were relegated out of the Football League. And the National League appears to be even more competitive than ever before, which unfortunately turns out to be true, because Scunthorpe are bottom of it at the moment. Barry says, what are the financial comparisons between the teams vying for promotion in 22-23, and could Scunthorpe face a long battle without new investment? And he adds the words, many thanks at the end, which is a good way of getting the question answered. But this has been a bad few days for Scunthorpe, Kieran. They really are looking like they can't avoid relegation to National League North. I presume they would be in. They face a winding up order now because of unpaid tax bills, and certainly speculation on Sky Sports yesterday is without new investors, they could be looking at a very bleak future.
Yes, it is very sad, and I believe there was a sit-in protest on the centre circle. Certainly, but Scunthorpe fans were on the pitch for a period of time.
They were
yesterday's match.
They were in the Championship 11 years ago, Kieran.
Yeah.
I
remember seeing Bobby Zamora sent off at Scunthorpe. I've huge sympathy for the predicament that they're in. If we start off looking at Barry's question, the National League is really tough. You've only got to look. We've got Wrexham and Notts County, both at the top there, quite often getting 5-figure crowds. The wage bill for some of the clubs is in the region of £3 to £4 million. You've got players who are dropping out of Leagues 1 and 2 to sign deals with clubs in the National League, and the average losses for clubs in the Championship. And I'm going back here to pre-COVID time. So taking out the clubs were on average losing £700,000 a year, and that's across the whole division.
Wow.
So it's it's a really tough position that the clubs find themselves in. And we saw Scunthorpe and Oldham both relegated last season, both big clubs. You and I remember the glory days of Oldham.
Oh, God, yeah.
When they were in the Premier League, and the likes of Frankie Bunn and Andy Ritchie were doing amazing things.
The same day we beat Liverpool 4-3, they were drawing, I think, 3-3 with Man United in the FA Cup semi-final.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's it is such a sad fall. It is the nature of football, and I think it comes down to the culture of the club coming from the very top. So you rightly said Scunthorpe have had a winding up order from HMRC. I've seen the amount of money that's owed to HMRC. I'm not going to say it on the show, but it is substantial. They also owe the EFL a large amount of money because when we did have COVID, the EFL arranged loans for clubs. I believe there is money outstanding to the kit supplier. And we've spoken that the club owner has his own personal issues, and there's an ongoing court case there. So I have a lot of sympathy, and then and this might sound that I'm trying to pick on people and I'm trying to be bitchy, but I'm genuinely not. On Friday, I saw that there was planning permission put in to redevelop the ground, and I'm going, I think you should be focusing on short-term issues, and also there was a racehorse which appears to be owned by something to do with the owners, because it's owned by something called the Cool Silk Partnership, which was running in Abu Dhabi. And I'm going, if you're trying to get Scunthorpe United out of this mess, and it has been said that Begbie's, the insolvency firm, are there at present, but the club's not in administration because they're trying to do a workaround to avoid administration. Or a long administration, so to say. Then why are you running racehorses in Abu Dhabi? Ironically, it came 14th out of 14 horses as well, which I think it just sort of shows where the club is, or where people connected to the club are in terms of decision making. So it's a very sad situation. It's a very expensive business to get out. But what I would say to Scunthorpe fans, winding up order is not the same as the end of the club. Even dropping into the National League North is not the end, because we've seen Stockport County drop into National League North, and then a new owner comes in, the fans rally round. They went back into the National League. They're now back into League Two, and they've got people who are pointing in the same direction. And I think this is part of the problem: is that there has been a disconnect between the club owners and the fan base, and that normally comes down to communication. Because you and I, we both met Andy Holt at Accrington, and Andy's a man that is not short of opinions, but what he does do is that he engages with people, and if you do talk to people and you don't patronise them and you're straight with them, then I think you can get them on board, and that relationship. When you've got owners who are suing fans and suing other people who do raise concerns about individual football clubs, that's not really the way to go through that. To build up that relationship.
And there have been rumours, Kieran, of new investors for Scunthorpe. Do we know anything hard, concrete about that?
Yes, there have been offers. I've been contacted on social media by some of the people involved in making the offers, and I think there is a sense of frustration. I don't want to put too many words into this, but sometimes you think you've reached an agreement and somebody moves the goalposts. And that really doesn't help when you've got a business which is going through a crisis.
And in terms of getting out of that National League, Kieran, is there any particular reason why they can't have 2 automatic promotion places? Because that's what's making things very difficult. Is that a dispute with the EFL? Is it a hangover from the old applying for re-election days. What is the reason?
It is sort of a legacy issue. We have seen over the course of the last week or two. I think this is part of the EFL's overall strategy in trying to have a more equitable distribution of monies within the football pyramid overall. That they are willing to have 2 up, 2 down, and then a playoff. Remember the very first time that playoffs used to exist in the top division?
Yeah.
You'd have the side which finished third bottom in the playoffs against 3 teams from the top of what we now call the championship. I think the EFL, they don't necessarily want to go up 3 down, 3 up, 3 down, but you could have 3 down by having the side that finishes third bottom of League Two in a playoff arrangement with some of the top teams in the National League itself. And it creates excitement and it creates interest. And it's certainly, the crowds for those matches and it's not joy. Yeah, we both had playoff matches ourselves and we both seen that, we both suffered success and failure. It's not joy. It is tension, but it's the most incredible tension you'll potentially get. And that in some ways is actually really good because that drives interest and that drives attendance and that drives more money into the game.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Richard H. And rather like Richard's name, which starts strongly with a big, firm, full name, but then just has an H. I think this is a really, really good question until the second bit when it gets a bit accountancy-based, basically. And Richard H's question is this. After last season's Champions League final, there were rumours flying around that Chelsea actually made more money than Liverpool from the game due to Eden Hazard's sell-on clause. My question is, how would this be treated in the accounts? Would this be a contingent liability? And if so, at what point would it be recognised?
Okay, right. Liverpool earned €15.5 million from UEFA for getting to the final of the Champions League. Clearly, we don't know how much was the agreement in terms of sell-on fees between Chelsea and Real Madrid. It's a private document, but I would imagine it could be potentially very beneficial to Chelsea. And what we actually have here is something called a contingent asset. And a contingent asset is it's possible future money that could be received, which is dependent upon an uncertain future event. And because accountants are so cautious, they say, don't bank that just yet as far as the accounts are concerned. You can only show it in the accounts when it's certain or virtually certain. What you're allowed to do is that if you think it's probable, you can stick it in a note. And if you go through the footnotes to the accounts of different clubs, you will see some figures quoted on occasion, but in others you don't. When does it actually therefore appear in the accounts? Well, we were talking at the start of the show about Chelsea having this quite amazing success in terms of selling players. Well, it will crystallise in the year in which the condition is satisfied. So if there was, say, a £15 million bonus, if Real Madrid won the Champions League, then that will occur in Chelsea's 21-22 accounts, and that will further alleviate any financial fair play worries that they have in the short term, though I do think that they're building up a much longer term problem.
You touched on the question there, Kieran. I'm forever hinting to Bobby Numbers about, and I don't know if you can do this in football. It's say a football club has been paid a large amount of money. Is there flexibility for the accountant to say, well, we can put that in next year's accounts or the year after? Is there a time limit by which you have to include something in the accounts, or are you legally obliged to do so within the tax accounting period?
There are very specific rules with regards to invoicing and cash flow with regards to your VAT return, for example. And there's also what we refer to as revenue recognition rules, which are, again, they are pretty strict from an accounting point of view, because this is to stop companies from accelerating or decelerating revenues. And you can see the logic behind that, because let's say that you're a football club or any other business, you've got a 31st of March year end, and the government says, in 2022, the rate of tax is going to be 25%, and in 2023, it's going to be 19%. You go say, well, okay, well, let's not take any profits in 2022. Now, there are some industries, construction, for example, where it's pretty easy to shift the numbers forwards and backwards, because if you and I look at a skyscraper and you say, well, you've done some work in the year, so therefore you've got to show some money coming in. We're clueless, aren't we? We say, well, it's £200 million business. It's a £200 million building. Have they done £20 million worth of work? Have they done £40 million worth? Have they done 80? We wouldn't have a clue. I'll be honest, the accountants wouldn't have a clue either, because they're accountants. So therefore, you get somebody from the company and they say, well, based on, we are the experts, we're involved in construction, it's X. And they'll get somebody else at the company to sign it off, and it just goes through on the nod. So it's easy for some businesses. If you're Tesco's and you're selling bread and bananas, you're stuffed. You've either sold them or you haven't.
Uncle Terry would know how much money had been made on a skyscraper at any one time. 200 quid a year is my guess. So, but Terry, they've built 5 floors in 2 months. 200 quid. No,
well, you wouldn't argue with him.
No, you wouldn't. And also, we know from experience that Uncle Terry wants skyscrapers built as quickly as possible in case anyone examines their foundations.
That's true.
Our next question comes from Andrew Flood, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Andrew. It's Floud. So if it's Floud or indeed Flood, I apologise, but let's stick with Andrew Flood. And Andrew says Milan were taken over last year for €1.2 billion. It's got me thinking about the Newcastle takeover and how that compares. So Newcastle were bought for around £300 million, which is around €350 million. Milan turned over €216 million in 21-22, while Newcastle turned over €170 million. Does this mean Newcastle was a very good deal for the new owners, or is it that the business world is forecasting more potential growth within other major European leagues to compete financially with the Premier League?
Right. I think this is quite a nerdy question. So thank you, Andy, because I am a nerd. When you value any business, the best way to value it is to look at your future expectations. How much money am I going to make out of this particular venture? And you also look at the degree of confidence and certainty that you have. So in the case of AC Milan, I'll be honest, I don't personally see a huge amount of growth in the Serie A broadcast revenues. But if you speak to, as a football fan, would I expect AC Milan to be in the Champions League on a regular basis? The answer is yes. And whilst there's not a huge amount of money compared to the Premier League from the domestic broadcast arrangements, UEFA and the Champions League, especially the expanded Champions League, is looking increasingly lucrative. So you might say, well, we'd expect AC Milan to be in the Champions League, let's say at least 8 years out of 10, and you'd factor that into your future expectations of future cash. Whereas I think in the case of Newcastle, let's face it, they're having a brilliant season. They've been really, really smart with their recruitment and player development strategy. I don't think many people thought that they would be in a Champions League place in the middle of January 2023, and therefore, when PIF did their valuation and when Mike Ashley worked out his expected sales price for Newcastle, it was on the basis of, we might get into the Europa Conference on occasion, but breaking into the Big Six is going to be very, very expensive. And therefore, you're not going to be making money. But I think the people involved with Newcastle, and you've got to give a huge amount of credit to Dan Ashworth and Eddie Howe and other people connected with the club. I think they have surpassed expectations, and Newcastle is now looking like a bargain. If we take a look at other deals, Bournemouth have gone for 120 million. When West Brom was sold, we've spoken to Alistair and other people connected to West Brom. West Brom was sold for around about 200 million as a Premier League club. Southampton 260. I've heard stories relating to Crystal Palace that the owners were looking for, if there was a complete takeover, somewhere in the region of 240, 250. So Newcastle slightly more than that, and I think that's probably right because they've got it's a one city club. It's got a 50,000 capacity stadium. It's got some things which would increase the value over the likes of, if you're benchmarking against what you'd say the peer groups, and West Ham, Southampton, Palace, that type of club. I think intuitively we would say Newcastle's worth a wee bit more than that, but you don't rank Newcastle at present alongside the likes of AC Milan, given that they have been sort of hardy perennials of the Champions League, and it was that which drove the AC Milan price more than anything else.
So you think then that Mike Ashley will be sitting in his office in Coventry thinking, "Rats, I undersold Newcastle then."
With an element of hindsight, yes, but I do think the culture of the club, and this is something which is hugely misinterpreted and misunderstood. I think the culture of the club has changed significantly. The ability to sell Newcastle has changed significantly because Newcastle has a much higher profile in the MENA, the area, the Middle East and North Africa, in terms of its attractiveness to sponsors, commercial partners, and so on. And that wasn't the case with Mike Ashley because his business experience is looking at things as, how can I run on a break even, keeping costs to a minimum? And I think the new owners have completely changed that environment, and it's worked. They may have become the new Everton by spending quite a lot of money and spending it on duds. But Newcastle, they've just been smart.
Those scenes at Everton yesterday were unsavoury, were they not? I know this is not the pod to talk about that, but you can't have a situation where the owners of the club have been advised not to go there for their own safety. Kieran, can you? That's awful.
Yeah, I'm a great believer in non-violent direct action, the importance of protest, because without the suffragettes, without the co-op movement, we would be living in a far worse society. There's a difference between protest and threats, I possibly this isn't the first time this is, or something similar of this nature has happened, for all we know.
And we also should point out that the vast majority of Everton fans would agree with your approach, Kieran. It's never too late to say this, but Happy New Year from our friends at Manscaped. The ball has officially dropped, but that doesn't mean you have to drop the ball on your balls in 2023. Instead, why not join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with an offer especially for Price of Football listeners. If you go to manscaped.com and use the code Price of Football in big letters, Price of Football, you'll get 20% off the price of your order and free shipping.
Indeed, chaps. If when you drop your trousers, you don't want it to resemble Davy Crockett's hat, then what you need is the Manscaped Performance Package 4.0. You'll find the signature Lawnmower 4.0, its advanced skin-safe technology, which reduces cuts and nicks on your delicate parts. And it also comes equipped with a 4000K LED spotlight. A grooming routine isn't, however, complete without applying Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver before showing off your 2023 self. And to complete the set, Manscaped are throwing in their shed travel bag and anti-chafing boxer briefs as free gifts to keep all your goodies stored comfortably.
I've just Googled Davy Crockett's hat, and no, I do not want to look like that down there. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code PriceOfFootball at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com, and use that code PriceOfFootball. Time to feel sexy and free this 2023 with Manscaped. Speaking of mispronouncing names, I'm hoping that I've got this one correct. So our next question comes from Javad Garici. And I'm going to wade into this question, Kieran, and say it with some confidence to disguise the fact that I have not got a clue what it means. Javad's question is, when it comes to club valuations, which is a better metric for investors to make investment decisions? Is it enterprise value, or is it EBITDA, and why? Now, you have told me about EBITDA before, but I still can't remember which of the robots from Star Wars he is.
Yes. Again, this is a nerd question. It's actually quite closely linked to what we've just been talking about in terms of Newcastle United. Enterprise value, for people not familiar with the term, is the value of the football club as a business, and that ultimately is determined by the club's ability to generate cash. EBITDA is a cash variant of profit. Now, without, I'm sure people are switching off in their thousands as I start to go through this, but
not our listeners. Oh no, not our listeners. BAFTA maybe, but not our listeners.
Enterprise value can actually be determined by EBITDA. So they're a lot closer than people think. Sometimes you will use something called an EBITDA multiple, and then you compare the enterprise value of one business to another, and you work out an overall value for the club. Quite often, enterprise value is calculated by something called discounted cash flows, and this is where we do sort of enter the smoke and mirrors part of corporate valuations. Discounted cash flows is where you say, how much cash is this business going to make over, let's say, the next 5 to 8 years? Now, you then think, you and I both think, well, we haven't got a clue, because especially if you take a football club, if you take Brighton or Palace, we could be in the Premier League in 5 or 8 years' time, both of us. We could be in the Championship. We may have played a year or two in Europe, or we may have been scrapping for relegation. It's based on future expectations. And for other industries, if we were looking at a company which makes it makes chips for computers, then the chances are, you broadly know how many computers are going to be sold every year. For the last 10 years, the market's been expanding by 3% a year. You can project that forward, stick it into a spreadsheet, and you can get a number out with which you will have a reasonable degree of confidence. With football, you can't do that. There is so much uncertainty in football. We've just been talking about Scunthorpe United. They were in the Championship, and they're now potentially are going to be in National League North. So putting any discounted cash flow valuation into a model and using that to determine enterprise value is high risk. So therefore, another way of doing that is to look at your historic profits. But again, if you take a look at any of the sort of some of the big clubs, they are oscillating wildly between profit and loss.
Very good. Excellent.
I'm glad you picked up on that.
Excellent Smith's reference. Is EBITDA an acronym?
Yes, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. And it's a cash proxy for profit. The reason why people in the world of valuation like it is depreciation and valuation are quite often very arbitrary figures. If I was to say to you, there's a new factory, over how many years do you think we should depreciate it? Well, you might say 20 years, you might say 25, you might say 50. So there's the numbers are easy to manipulate. And this is where the people in the world of finance and the accountants sort of have a bit of a fallout, because the people in finance want more precision and the accountants tend to be a bit more laissez-faire with regards to it.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Jamie Ballock, and I think this is a really interesting question. I say I think because, to be honest, my attention span slips about 2/3 of the way through, but it seems to me to be an interesting one. And Jamie says, I'd like to know what you think about the idea of an equal spending cap based on an average revenue as part of any FFP model. So rather than allowing clubs to spend based on their own income, what if the average incomes of the top 6 clubs were used to create a spending cap? That way, clubs with less revenue but a rich owner could spend up, while larger state-owned clubs who seem to find what seems like inflated local sponsorship revenue can't spend all that money, but actually help raise everyone else's spending cap through the average. I would still keep the fair market rules as well, so could it help level the playing field a little bit if it worked?
Yes, this is. I think Jamie's idea here has some similarities with what we see in the likes of the NFL and the NBA, in which there is greater equalisation of revenues. When I was asked by some people, I can't say who they are, to come up with some distribution models, this was one of the models that we did indeed look at, and we crunched the numbers and I put them into the spreadsheet and so on. The aim to do is to reduce the inequality between the richest and the poorest. And if we take a look at the Premier League, the richest clubs are generating around about 600. I think it's around about 630 million for Manchester City. I think Liverpool are going to potentially could overtake Manchester United in terms of revenue when Liverpool's accounts come out for 2022. But at the other end of the scale, you've got clubs who are generating perhaps 120 million. So by having a spending cap and perhaps a spending collar as well, it reduces what the bigger clubs can have. If you have some sort of change in the distribution models for match day income, because we're both old enough to remember we have football and money. Things started to slide when the clubs decided that they were going to keep all of their home receipts, and I don't think you should go that far, because that would discourage clubs from spending money to improve their stadiums. But if you take a look at what they do in the NFL, 60% goes to the home club. So it still gets the lion's share. 40% goes into an overall pool. So the more fans that turn up, the more money goes into that pool, and it just helps to take off the edge between the richer clubs and the less rich clubs. So I'm in favour of it. I think it's a progressive idea. It doesn't make me a communist or a socialist to want a more even distribution of money between the clubs. I think it just makes it a more competitive Premier League. And people will say, well, Chelsea are having a bad season, Liverpool are having a bad season. They're still in the top half of the table. Even these clubs, and Fulham, Brentford, Brighton, we're doing fantastically well, but it ain't going to last.
Yeah,
it ain't going to last forever. That's for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't be more pleased for you. For new listeners, Kieran, could you, and for me, let's be honest, the spending collar, what's that?
A spending collar, this is what exists in the NFL. It's to say you've got to spend a minimum amount on wages as well, because and I think it's probably more appropriate for something like the NBA or the NFL, which is a closed league with no relegation. Because if you think about it, if you are guaranteed a broadly equal share, and again, I do think we need to incentivize results. So I don't think we should split things evenly. I think the Premier League got it broadly right at present. But if you were in a league in which you're guaranteed 100 million a year from TV, and you're guaranteed 40% from the attendance pool plus 60% of your home games, and there's no relegation, there's nothing to stop you from sort of, dropping down to the local Weatherspoons, getting 11 blokes and say, do you want to play for my football team? I'll pay you 70 quid a week. And watch your team stink out the division, and you've got guaranteed money coming in. So you've got to spend, I think the collar is around about 80% of the cap. So the players overall in a relatively small range of prices in terms of their remuneration.
There are several subjects, Kieran, that crop up with an alarming basis on this pod, and they are the subject of many, many of our questions. So FFP, amortisation, the price of quinoa, the Amex. But certainly the West Ham stadium deal is something that exercises the imagination of a lot of our listeners. And this is an interesting take on it from Paul Wright. Paul Wright says most people agree that West Ham got a great deal on their use of the London Stadium. But what happens as time wears on, and what is the true cost of this deal to their development? Over the 99 years of the lease, the shape of what fans need will change, and the stadium might need to be rebuilt and or redeveloped. A stadium like Old Trafford shows us that what was built 20, 30 years ago is now in poor condition and needs upgrading to be competitive and to meet fan expectations. What control or say do West Ham have in terms of when or if this happens?
Well, I agree with Paul, and I suspect the reason why so many listeners are interested in West Ham's position, because the vast majority of listeners are taxpayers.
Yeah.
And therefore they say, we don't think we're getting the greatest deal here. And just to put it into context, last year, West Ham paid rent of £3.6 million for the London Stadium, and that was up by £800,000 compared to the previous season, because my understanding from looking at various bits and pieces and listening to people I know connected sort of indirectly to West Ham is that if West Ham have more than 25 home matches a season, then they have to pay extra. And remember, of course, West Ham had a fantastic season last year in the Europa League, and they reached the semi-final. So I think they ended up paying 28 matches, so they had to pay it more in rent. But the operating costs of the London Stadium were somewhere in the region of 17 to 18 million pounds, and those operating costs were borne by LLDC. They were borne by the taxpayer. So West Ham got 18 million pounds worth of benefit for the 3.6 million pounds worth of cost. So that's the positives from their perspective. The downside, it's exactly the same as any person who is a tenant. You have little or no control over the repairs, maintenance, development of that property itself. So that's the downside from West Ham's point of view. But that's Finley leaving the room. I understand where Paul's coming from. What happens if LLDC spend no money? In the tenancy agreement, I think there will be a minimum level of service that the landlord has to agree to. And if they fail to do that, then they could potentially be on the receipt of litigation. And I think there has been some threats of litigation historically between the owner and the tenant here. But if it's only costing me £3.5 million of rent, and I'm saving myself £17 million in costs, that gap can be put into the playing budget. So I don't see this as being a negative. In 20 or 30 years' time, could things change? Yes, but the political landscape could have changed, and also would the authorities who own the stadium want to have people pointing the finger to say, well, that was our Olympic stadium and you've let it run to ruin. So I think they would be under political pressure as much as anything else to have it to a reasonable level of standard. And it is also used for other items. It is used for athletics. It is used for concerts in the summer. And you won't be able to get Rod Stewart or Rick Astley selling it out in the summer if it's in shabby condition, because they'll say, we'd rather go to the Emirates or to Spurs Stadium or to Hyde Park and strut our funky stuff there.
Rick Astley's one of the nicest people I've ever met.
Excellent.
Yeah, I've never met Rod Stewart, so I can't comment, but he'd have to go a long way to be as nice as Rick Astley. Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Brian Snowden. And Brian says, in 2021, Watford went into a shirt sponsorship deal with Stake, a crypto casino and sports betting platform, brackets, what could possibly go wrong, which I think is Brian's aside rather than Stake's business plan. And Stake paid for the multi-million-pound deal, with crypto reflecting, in the words of CEO Scott Duxbury, the ambitious outlook and commitment to innovation of both parties. Again, in brackets, what could possibly go wrong? Is there any indication in Watford's accounts as to how this played out, and if the club did the sensible thing of immediately converting the crypto into a range of assets?
My understanding is Watford did the sensible thing, right, and it left the crypto bank account in the form of crypto, and it arrived at Watford's bank account in the form of physical sterling cash.
Right.
And like any other asset, you can sell it and convert it into cash. So Watford decided to de-risk this. We have seen an awful lot of volatility in the market, and I am quite conservative when it comes to my money and how I choose to spend it, and I think it would be it's far too risky for me to put a lot of money into something like crypto. But if you go back to 2019, Watford at that stage, they had I think they had a front of shirt sponsorship deal with an organisation called sportbet.io. And I think that deal, you normally get somewhere in the region of 6 to 7 million for a mid-tier Premier League club like Watford. Yeah, that was very much the going rate. And I understand that was paid in Bitcoin. And at the time that Watford went through that deal, Bitcoin was worth, one Bitcoin was valued at £9,500. Within a few months, Bitcoin went up to £45,000. So if Watford had a crystal ball, yeah, and let's face it, we've all said this at Haydock and Nottingham and Aintree as well. If Watford had a crystal ball, but instead of the £6 to £7 million they made from the deal, they could have actually made £33 million for a single year from sportbet.io. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and the price of Bitcoin has fallen by around about 70% since then. So it's a highly volatile, unregulated, potentially manipulated asset. So it comes with a lot of risk, and Watford decided to de-risk by not going down the let's hold on to Bitcoin and keep our fingers crossed. And of course, the other issue is that if you hold on to Bitcoin, persuading your suppliers and persuading your staff to take payment for wages and for the money and for goods and services supplied to them in the form of Bitcoin, that might be challenging too. Because if I do some work for somebody, or if I'm having the house decorated at present, if I said to the decorator, Phil, who's a very good guy and a big West Ham fan, said, Phil, do you fancy being paid in Bitcoin? He'd give me one of those looks that only decorators can give you.
Yeah, to be honest, Kieran, if you said anything to Phil the decorator, he'd say, sorry, mate, the Baroness is the one who tells me what to do in this situation.
Yes.
Our final question comes from Johnny Foster, and I like the sound of Johnny Foster. I'm sure Johnny Foster is a really, really nice bloke, but when it comes to his football team, he's obviously defensive and a bit chippy, which I like, because Johnny Foster says, I'm a Huddersfield fan who has recently partied to a bit of quibbling about being a small team. Now, in my mind, somebody called Huddersfield a small team just before the tables went over in the bar. But Johnny wants to know who would be in the top 5 teams in the 92 when it comes to fans per capita. I'm thinking average attendance versus population or something like that. It's a good question. I think a lot of us who don't support massive clubs like to think that we are still big clubs, in a ratio of these, in terms of our size of population, etc. So where would Huddersfield be is what Johnny's trying to ask, rather than What about the other top 5 teams?
Well, Huddersfield, in my view, would be towards the top of the list, because if we take a look at the population of Huddersfield, it's 162,000, and they're getting crowds in. They're getting decent crowds. But having done a bit of work of this, I can't give you a top 5, but I can probably give you who I think would possibly be number 1, and that would be Burnley.
Oh,
yeah, but Burnley average an attendance of around about 19,000 this season, and in the Premier League it was more than 20,000. Burnley, if you go to the official census, has got a population of 88,000. So around about 20% of Burnley's population is going. Now, if we were to put that into context, I tried to find a few other one city clubs, and Newcastle and Leeds are sort of two which come to mind, and they do have fantastic fan bases. But if they were getting the same proportion of fans as Burnley do, they would be both playing in front of home attendances of 175,000.
Wow!
So that's indicative of But I think you have to be a little bit cautious about this, because how do you define where a town or city ends? I know it's defined from a census point of view, but in Burnley, do you include some of the other areas close to the town itself in respect of places that don't necessarily have a football team? When I plugged in the figures for Brighton, it worked out. Brighton, if we would be getting crowds of 59,000. I thought, well, again, that's indicative, I think, of just how close knit Burnley is. But if I'd had enough time, I would have done it for all 92, but I didn't. But I did it for a few, and certainly, in my opinion, Burnley are top or pretty close to the top.
Yeah, Johnny, you've got nothing to worry about. I mean, Huddersfield, what a rich history and tradition that club had. They dominated English football in the 30s. So I imagine Kieran, Plymouth would be fairly high on that list, which is a good way of telling you that our next live show will, of course, be taking place on March 21st at Plymouth Argyle's home park. We'd love to see you there. Because we had to change the date, there are some tickets now available, and you can head to Plymouth Argyle's website to get them. Thanks to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution as well to the pod, then you can go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you, everybody, for the support for the show and for contacting us and asking us questions and so on. And that's why we decided to add that little Chelsea chat at the start, because there has been a lot of interest. A lot of Newcastle fans, a lot of Manchester United fans saying, well, how come Chelsea is spending it as if it's going out of fashion? And our owners are saying, well, we need to be a little bit more cautious. So Patreon, one way of supporting the show. Just having a chat with us. We're pretty affable guys. Is another, but a third way is to go onto your podcast app and give us a review. It helps us in the charts. It helps us to have a bit of credibility when we're trying to get guests for the show. It doesn't matter what you put in terms of the narrative. If you want to give a narrative description of the review, you could even say you would rather have it. You could rather have it presented by Jeffrey Archer and Leandro Trossard's agent, both of whom are known for great works of fiction. And it wouldn't bother us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.